I closed a $55 million deal, and on the very same day, I lost everything. Not metaphorically, literally. I was sitting in the conference room finalizing delivery terms with the client, and while the documents were being laid out on the table, my corporate badge was already being deactivated. Imagine this. You spend a year of your life flying across 3 continents, piecing together endless email chains, aligning the interests of lawyers, engineers, financiers, and politicians, only to watch your work turn into someone else's medals pinned to their lapel. I'll tell you how it happened, because stories like this rarely get told out loud. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll see that karma is real. And sometimes it comes wearing a lawyer's suit and carrying an official seal. Subscribe and leave a like. This story deserves to be heard. My manager, Michael, was one of those rare people who always knew more than he said. He didn't smile out of obligation, didn't make empty promises, he just delivered. When he and I started negotiations with global data systems, we were talking about a project that could change not only our company, but the market itself. Integration across 3 countries, Tier 4 certified data centers, cloud service subscriptions with binding SLAs and penalties for every minute of downtime. All of it in one contract. I remember his words on day 1. We'll close this, not for glory, to prove that we can. And we did close it, but that was when the game began, one with rules we didn't write. A week before signing, Michael was called upstairs. The wording was cold. Failure to align with corporate values. He came back pale, placed his badge on the desk, and said just one thing to me. They've already decided everything. Stay clear. I didn't understand then. What difference did it make who was steering the ship if the deal was almost done? But I understood too late. On signing day, just as the client put pen to the final appendix, the door to the conference room swung open. My boss walked in, a man I'd always thought of as a distant figure. Expensive suits, a press-ready smile, a voice reserved for company-wide meetings. He slid into Michael's chair as if it had always been his, looked the client straight in the eye and said, I personally oversaw this deal. For us, this is a historic moment. I froze. Personally oversaw? This man hadn't joined a single call, hadn't spent nights in airports, hadn't argued with lawyers in Singapore or waited for stamped faxes from Berlin. He claimed it all as his own, and did it so calmly, as if there had never been another version of events. Half an hour later, once the signatures were done, I was summoned to the next conference room. HR and the head of security were waiting. On the table lay a document titled Reassignment of Duties. Your responsibilities for this contract are being transferred to another team, HR said flatly. Please hand over your access and badge. I asked, on what grounds? The reply was ice cold. Due to organizational changes, that's all. I walked out into the hallway and pulled out my phone. I wanted to call Michael, but his number was already disconnected. When I tapped my badge at the turnstile, the light flashed red. It was over. At that moment, one thought consumed me. What happens next? I was left without a job, without a bonus, without recognition. My boss hadn't just stolen the deal. He'd stolen my name that was woven into it. But do you know what he hadn't stolen? My knowledge of the details. Every email, every clause, every weak spot he hadn't noticed. And that knowledge would change everything. I walked out of the building where, just a couple of hours earlier, the biggest contract of my life had been signed, and I felt nothing but emptiness. The rain was so fine it looked like mist. People hurried past me, unaware that I had just lost not only my job, I had lost a year of my life, and most importantly, I had lost the right to my own work. But even then, sitting in my car with my deactivated badge in my pocket, I understood one thing. If I spoke up, I still had a chance. Because the boss who had just stolen the deal didn't know half of what was really holding it afloat. The first interrogation took place in a conference room. 3 of them, HR, security, and a lawyer. The atmosphere was like a courtroom, where the verdict was already known. "We need you to hand over all project artifacts," the lawyer said, clicking his pen. I placed my corporate laptop, tablet, and flash drives on the table. Everything according to protocol. But I still had my notebooks, dozens of pages written by hand, and I had emails. The very emails clients had sent to my personal address when the corporate server crashed in the middle of the night. Technically, it wasn't against the rules. The client had chosen the channel, and I had simply answered. They demanded everything. I gave them exactly what I was required to give, but what I knew, how the integration was stitched together, which sub-processes relied entirely on a single engineer in Boston, which temporary certificates in Europe were still awaiting approval. All of that I kept for myself. My boss was in a hurry. He wanted to run to the press immediately, announce his triumph, show the shareholders that he had landed the deal of the year. But he forgot one thing, the details. A week later, the client sent the first warning, a yellow notice, a formal signal of risk. The reason, mismatches in the certification schedule for the data centers. The contract contained a clause. Without that certification document, the core service could not launch, and the document was still in progress. Michael, my fired manager, had been in direct contact with the certification committee. I had the correspondence. My boss? He didn't even know who signed the papers in Berlin. I read those emails at home, surrounded by moving boxes, because the office no longer belonged to me. The client wrote, "Why has the team changed? Who should we contact for technical issues?" The reply they got from the boss's office was generic. "You are being handled by senior management." But the client didn't want slogans. They needed engineers. And then came the first cracks. On the internal test stand, response times doubled. In the reports the boss showed, the numbers looked perfect. But anyone reading the logs knew the truth. They were fake. Within a month, the contract was hanging by a thread. The client demanded an independent audit. That's when I realized everything I had saved, my notes, the emails, the diagrams, was about to turn from reminders into weapons. My boss had no idea. He walked the halls smiling, giving interviews, projecting control. But in reality, he was already skating on thin ice. And I sat at home, opening my laptop and rereading the client correspondence, feeling the power building inside me, the power that sooner or later would turn against him. That's when I took the first step. I called Michael. He picked up and said only, "I was waiting for this call." Silence turned out to be more powerful than shouting. That evening, when I spoke to Michael for the first time after his firing, I realized one thing. You can't react the same way they do. Scandals, threats, loud statements, all of that would only play into my boss's hands. He liked to present himself as a strategist, leading the corporation to victory, and any outrage from me would look like the whining of a loser. No, I had to stay silent and wait. We met in a small coffee shop on the edge of town. Michael came without a tie, a folder tucked under his arm. He looked tired, but not broken. "Do you understand they don't have the people to carry this deal through?" he asked as soon as we sat down. "I do," I nodded, "but they think they've got everything covered." "They're wrong," he smirked. "They don't have knowledge. They don't have the client's trust. And they don't have patience." Michael pulled out a few sheets, copies of internal emails he had managed to save. They were marked in red: pending certification, unresolved dependencies, third region pilot. Each of those points was baked into the contract, and every one of them could blow up under the boss's feet. "It's just a matter of time," Michael said. "They're going to trip more and more often." I went back to the tiny co-working space where I was renting a desk. Two of my former colleagues from the integration team were already there. They had left the company on their own when they realized they were just being used as extras. Together we formed a skeleton team: 3 laptops, a whiteboard, and vending machine coffee. Every day we ran an unofficial monitoring operation, test stand logs, SLA metrics, open client tickets. All of this was technically public, but no one inside the corporation bothered to actually look. They believed the glossy reports. We looked at the numbers, and the numbers were screaming. Response times in Asia exceeded the limit by 30%. In Europe, certification documents were delayed. In the US, a data center had failed its final power audit. Piece by piece, it was all forming a picture of disaster. Meanwhile, life kept reminding me that every fight has a price. I was living on savings. The mortgage payments ticked on. My wife looked at me in silence, but I saw the worry in her eyes. "Are you sure you can handle this?" she asked one night. I answered honestly, "I'm not sure. But if I step back now, they'll erase me completely." We fell asleep in silence, but inside me a storm was raging. I kept replaying the moment my boss walked into the conference room and claimed my work as his own. It burned like fire. I couldn't forget it. And that pain, that very burn, was what gave me strength. A month later came the breakthrough. The client requested an independent audit. The boss tried to fast-track a progress report, but his numbers didn't even match from one table to another. We knew the auditors would spot it instantly, and when they started asking questions, the real data would have to come out. That's when I wrote my first email, not official, not confrontational, just a simple message to one of the client's project leads. "I know you have questions about the current metrics. If you need an independent perspective or clarification of the details, I'm willing to meet." The reply came 2 hours later. "Let's discuss, confidentially." That was the moment I understood. Silence had given me a chance. While my boss was giving interviews and building a career on stolen work, we were quietly assembling the puzzle, and the client was beginning to see the difference between noise and real work. That evening, I closed my laptop and, for the first time in weeks, smiled, because now the game was shifting onto my field. The audit came like a thunderclap. For weeks, the client's questions had been circling closer and closer to the truth, and when the official notice landed in the company's inbox, I knew the game had changed. This wasn't some polite request for clarification. This was a forensic investigation into the numbers my boss had been parading as his personal triumph. Auditors don't care about PowerPoint slides or rehearsed speeches. They care about logs, timestamps, and signatures. Within days, they uncovered what I already knew. The response times in Asia exceeded contractual limits by almost 30%. The certification in Europe was still unresolved, and the North American data center, it failed its redundancy test, something my boss had sworn was already signed off. The report was merciless. Pages of red flags, unanswered dependencies, and contradictions between official progress reports and actual system performance. In the boardroom, the temperature dropped. My boss, usually smooth, arrogant, full of charm, was suddenly defensive, sweating and snapping at people who once hung on his every word. I wasn't there physically. I didn't need to be. But I had ears in that room. One of the engineers, a friend of mine, sent me a single text during the meeting. "He's cracking." The client wasn't fooled either. They sent an escalation letter formally warning the company that contractual penalties would apply if the issues weren't resolved immediately. Worse still, they hinted at invoking the change of control clause. Few people understood what that meant. I did. It was a nuclear option. If the vendor couldn't deliver, the client had the right to bring in an alternative partner to step in and take over execution. That was my opening. I drafted a careful, measured letter. Not angry, not emotional, just factual. I have maintained full records of project dependencies, unresolved certifications, and client-side integration details. Should you require continuity support, I'm in a position to provide independent oversight and stabilization. I didn't send it to the board. I sent it directly to the client's compliance officer. The reply came faster than I expected. "We will be in touch. Please keep all documentation secured." Meanwhile, inside the company, panic was spreading. Middle managers started whispering. Engineers quietly reached out to me, some offering data that contradicted the official narrative. others just venting about the chaos. And the boss? He doubled down. He stood in front of the board, raising his voice, claiming the auditors had misinterpreted data, insisting that everything was under control. But arrogance can't mask failing systems. I pictured him in that boardroom, pale, cornered, throwing papers onto the table, while outside, the client was already drawing up scenarios that didn't include him. Then it happened. The client sent a formal notice of potential supplier replacement. They hadn't pulled the trigger yet, but the threat was real. My boss tried to contain it with a PR spin, sending glossy emails about strategic restructuring. But to those of us who knew, it was the death rattle of his credibility. And me? I stayed quiet. No interviews, no angry rants online. Just silence, and a growing archive of everything they had done wrong. Because I knew the day would come when silence would turn into the loudest weapon of all. The threat became reality. The client's patience had snapped, and they triggered the stabilization protocol. It wasn't a full contract termination yet, but it meant one thing. The company had 90 days to prove they could deliver, or the deal would be restructured. And in that restructuring, the door cracked open just wide enough for me to step through. I got the call late at night. A compliance officer from the client's side, voice calm, professional. "We've reviewed your documentation. We're considering a step-in arrangement. Are you positioned to take on partial delivery?" My pulse hammered, but my answer was steady. "Yes, I have the team and the roadmap." That was only half true. The team was just a handful of loyal engineers working out of a rented co-working space. The roadmap? It was my handwritten notes and archived emails. But the client didn't need perfection. They needed competence. And competence was exactly what my former boss couldn't fake anymore. The transition came in 3 stages. First, the client carved out a temporary stabilization agreement. For 90 days, I was contracted as an independent consultant to oversee the most critical integration streams. The company still technically held the main contract, but my name was on the documents. Second, critical dependencies, certification in Europe, latency fixes in Asia, audit prep in North America, were reassigned to me and my small team. We worked like ghosts in the system, cleaning up failures, patching timelines, delivering reports that actually matched the numbers. And third, the most dangerous stage, negotiations for a permanent transfer of scope. Inside the company, my boss was imploding. He fired off cease and desist letters, trying to block me. He accused me of intellectual theft, of poaching resources, of sabotage. None of it stuck. Every accusation collapsed under the weight of audit logs, client correspondence, and my own meticulous records. Each time he tried to shut me out, the client pushed back harder. For the first time in his career, his voice carried no authority. Meanwhile, my team grew. Word spread. Former colleagues, burned out and discarded by the company, reached out to me. Some volunteered to join for less than market pay, just to work under leadership that valued them. In weeks, our 3 laptops and a whiteboard became a functional delivery unit. We weren't just fixing problems. We were proving something bigger, that loyalty and integrity could outmatch arrogance and greed. Then came the board vote. The client's executive committee convened to decide the future of the 55 milers contract. The options were clear. Keep it with the flailing company, or restructure with me as the trusted lead. In the lead-up, my boss flooded inboxes with glossy reports and desperate promises. He claimed the worst was behind them, that the project was on track. But by then, no one believed him. I didn't make grand speeches. I submitted logs, charts, clear timelines, facts. And when the committee compared both sides, the difference was night and day. The vote was unanimous. Effective immediately, I was contracted as trusted delivery lead. The 55 miler deal, the one I had built from scratch, the one they tried to steal, was back in my hands. I sat alone that night, staring at the signed documents. Relief washed over me, but also something else. Satisfaction. Not the loud kind. the quiet, heavy kind that fills your chest and leaves you breathless. My boss had spent months trying to erase me, and now the very client he had tried to impress had chosen me instead. The final meeting wasn't dramatic in the way movies make it. No shouting, no slammed fists, just silence, the kind that weighs more than noise ever could. The client's executive committee gathered in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the city. On the agenda, the formal transfer of the 55 Methlers contract and the appointment of a permanent delivery structure. I arrived with a folder under my arm and a calm expression. My boss was already there, his tie crooked, his eyes red from too many sleepless nights and too many lost battles. For months he had painted himself as the architect of success. Now, with the audit's findings stacked in front of everyone, he looked small, almost fragile. The chairwoman of the committee spoke first. "We've concluded our review. Effective immediately, we are restructuring the agreement. The trusted delivery lead will be—" She paused, looked directly at me, and said my name. The room stayed quiet for a beat too long. My boss shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. A stack of documents was slid across the table. My signature went on first. Clear, steady, final. The contract that had been stolen from me was back where it belonged. Then came the final humiliation. The committee required the company's representative, my boss, to countersign the transfer documents. He stared at the paper for a long moment, then picked up the pen with shaking fingers. His name appeared beneath mine, small and uneven. For the first time in my career, I saw him without the armor of arrogance, just another man who thought he could get away with everything, undone by his own greed. After the meeting, I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply collected my folder, nodded to the committee, and walked out. In the hallway, I slipped the old corporate access card, the one that had blinked red the day they fired me, into the trash. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. My phone buzzed with a new email. A potential client had heard about the step-in arrangement and wanted to talk. I smiled, not the forced smile of survival, a real one. Justice hadn't come in fireworks or revenge speeches. It had come in signatures, in silence, in the undeniable truth of results. My former boss lost his position, his reputation, and the empire he thought he owned. My former manager, Michael, joined me as COO of the new firm we built from the ashes. And me? I didn't just win back a contract. I won back my name. If you've made it this far, remember this. Loyalty is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And sometimes the best revenge is simply doing the work better than anyone else. Like this story, subscribe for more. Because the world is full of people who think they can steal without consequence. And I promise you, karma always shows up.